All right, so now what we want to do is think in a little more detail about a methodological point regarding the epistemology of food. And this methodological point is essentially asking the question of how do we gain knowledge? By what means do we actually gain the information, or do we already maybe have the information already stored in our minds in some sense? How do we get the knowledge with regard to anything? We need to start there, and then we can think about how that applies specifically to food. So I've got some terminology here on the board already for you. So let's kind of go through each term to make sense of what these different views say. So on the one hand, we've got a camp of philosophers that are sometimes called rationalist philosophers, or sometimes we refer to this as rationalism. Some of the key figures in the rationalist camp are philosophers like Plato, philosophers like Descartes. So those are some of the most well-known, most famous rationalist philosophers. And essentially what they argue, to some extent or another, maybe not exactly the same way, but the basic idea is we reflect on the concept in question or we reason about the thing itself. Right? Descartes specifically thought that there are some things that are known innately. Right? So there's some pieces of information, some pieces of knowledge that I can know simply by thinking. I don't have to go out in the world and experience it in some way. In some sense, it's already there, present in my mind before I do anything else. Plato's a little bit different, but the basic idea for Plato is similar, that we reflect upon the concepts and we try to understand what's going on. We can gain knowledge simply by unpacking what the concept already means. So if we think about justice, we can understand the essence of justice by unpacking that definition. Or something like knowledge, right? I can know what knowledge is by unpacking the essential ingredients of what that concept already contains. So it's a way of just simply reflecting, using reason alone to tell us what the concept means, or to make sense of whatever the subject happens to be. And there's more I'll say about the rationalists here in a minute. I think there are some good reasons to believe that this is the right approach, but there are some problems with this as well. So we'll get into that here in a minute. But the next point that I want to say is with regard to the empiricists. Right? The empiricists deny the rationalist claim that we can know things through reason alone, or that we can know things simply by reflecting on the concept. The empiricist says that all knowledge comes through experience. Or another way to put this is that all knowledge comes through our sense perception. Right? We have to actually make observations. We have to infer things through what we experience. And some of the key figures in this camp are people like Hume, who we'll talk about more in a little bit, and John Locke. In fact, Locke has this very famous quote. Locke says, we're born into the world with a tabula rasa. And this notion of a tabula rasa basically means something like a blank slate. So what he's basically saying at that point is, when you're born into the world, your mind is empty. It's a blank slate. It's a tabula rasa, is the way he puts it. That means that you don't already know anything, but you are the sort of organism, the sort of creature where we can fill that blank slate up with lots of information. Right? The slate is primed, it's ready to be written on. And the same way, a child comes into the world with nothing already known, right? The child's mind is empty, but it's ready to be filled up. right? So how does it get filled up? Through experience, right? Through experience, you learn more things, you come to know things, you come to understand things in the world. And I think, again, there's some reason to think that this is true, right? So just think about the way the brain works. What happens is when you experience things in the world, there's like neural pathways that sort of carve a trail into the structure of your brain. And so we, in a very real sense, the brain is a blank slate that is ready to be filled up with information by carving these neurological pathways and trails into the gray matter inside your skull. So I think that there is some reason to think something like this, that Locke's view of a tabula rasa, something like that might be true. Now, on the other hand, I think there's clearly some objections to this sort of view too. We are born with some basic sort of, you might call them instincts. And depending upon how you cash out what an instinct is, you might think that that would classify as the sort of innate knowledge that Descartes talks about. So what kind of examples might I refer to? Well, I think things like suckling, right? A baby is born with this instinct of being able to suck. Otherwise, the baby would starve and would die. Maybe there's some other instincts, like an instinct of sensing hunger, something like that. Now, whether or not that counts as knowledge, or whether or not it counts as merely a faculty that can be developed later on, that's in question. I just want to suggest that there might be a way to push back against this blank slate idea, this idea that your mind is a complete empty canvas to be painted upon. Now, another objection that Placius raises against this kind of empiricist view, I think is a really good objection. Basically, Placius says, when we think about how we know certain things about food, we can't always know things merely by our senses, right? So when I look at an apple, when I look at the apple, I cannot know if it is good for me or bad for me. Right? Maybe the apple's poisoned and it's going to kill me. I can't know that simply by looking at it, simply by using my empirical senses, my sense perceptions. All that's going to tell me is that it's an apple, or that it's red, or whatever. It's not going to give me any more information, and I might need that information in order to be able to successfully live throughout my days on the earth. Nonetheless, the empiricist, I think, does have a good point insofar as, it does seem like there's an evolutionarily important advantage to being able to use our senses to smell things or to taste things. So there's these aspects where we can get some sort of information about whether or not the apple is good or bad. Because if it looks spoiled, then that's some sort of indication that it would be bad for me. If it smells spoiled, then I have a good reason to think that it's bad for me. So there are some ways to push back against this objection too. Now, one other thing that I want to do at this point is talk about this distinction here between a priori and a posteriori. These are Latin terms. You don't have to be too concerned about the Latin itself, but I do want you to understand what they mean, because I think it helps us to make sense of this distinction between the rationalist and the empiricist approach to understanding how we gain knowledge. All right, so let's begin with this point about a priori knowledge. So this would be knowledge that we get either in some sense before or independent from experience. Right, so this maps nicely onto the rationalist point of view. Right, so this would be any kind of a claim that we can know independently of experience or before we ever go out in the world and make any observations. So then what kind of examples can we use to illustrate this? I think the best example might be math. Right, we can know that 2 plus 2 equals 4, not 5. I can know that independently of going out into the world and making observations. Right? I don't need to do a scientific experiment in order to know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. I can know this sitting in my chair, right? I can know this simply by thinking about what these terms or the concepts mean. And so mathematical information, maybe logical claims and truths maybe these things can be known simply by thinking, simply through reason alone, without making any judgments based on experience. Now, on the other hand, a posteriori, this is the exact opposite, right? This is kind of knowledge that is based upon or grounded in your experience, right? So a posteriori knowledge is knowledge that you gain by going out into the world, investigating things, making observations, doing experiments, and so forth. So I think the best example here would be scientific knowledge. Or if you're interested in other approaches to philosophy, something like phenomenology. Right, so that would be knowledge that you gain through thinking about your own first-person conscious life, your own first-person subjective experience of the world. All right, so I hope that helps you get a better sense of these different distinctions, different ways in which philosophers have approached this question of how do we know things. By what means do we gain knowledge? Now, of course, this is by no means exhaustive. For instance, there are other philosophers like Immanuel Kant who tries to, in some sense, bring these different views together so that they're not so distinct after all. But generally speaking, I think this gives us a good sort of lay of the land as we're proceeding through the rest of the questions and issues that we're going to address.